The day they decided I wasn't worthy of his last name was the day everything began to change. The smell of lemon polish clung to my hands as I pushed my cleaning cart down the east hallway of the Blackwell estate. Every surface around me gleamed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Marble floors reflected the warm glow of antique wall sconces. It looked like the kind of place people imagined when they thought about old money. To me, it was just work. Another 12-hour shift. Another day spent quietly moving through rooms most people would never see. I was 24 years old, and for the past 2 years, I had been one of the maids responsible for keeping the Blackwell mansion spotless. Most days, the family barely noticed I existed. Honestly, that was fine with me. Invisible people heard things. Invisible people survived. I adjusted the sleeve of my uniform and glanced at the grandfather clock near the library. Almost 7 in the evening. Most of the staff had already moved to the West Wing preparing for a charity dinner scheduled later that week. I was supposed to finish dusting the upstairs gallery before heading home to my tiny apartment across town. My feet ached. My back hurt. And all I could think about was reheating leftover soup and getting a few hours of sleep before my morning shift at the nursing home. Life wasn't glamorous. But it was honest. As I passed the drawing room, I heard voices. Normally, I would have kept walking. The Blackwell family valued privacy, and the staff knew better than to linger. But then I heard my name. My hand froze on the cart handle. "That girl is becoming too comfortable around Mother," a woman said sharply. I recognized the voice immediately. Margaret Blackwell. Ethan Blackwell's mother. Her tone carried the kind of polished judgment that could make a person feel small from across a room. Another voice answered. Softer. Amused. "She's just a maid, Margaret." A brief silence followed. Then Margaret laughed. Not warmly. Not kindly. Exactly. Which is why she should remember her place. My stomach tightened. I should have left. I knew that. But something rooted me to the spot. "Mother seems to adore her," the second woman continued. "Eleanor adores stray cats too. That doesn't mean they belong at the dinner table." More laughter. I stared at the polished floor beneath my shoes. "Besides," Margaret said, lowering her voice, "a girl like Grace Carter could never carry the Blackwell name. Some people simply aren't built for that world." The words landed harder than they should have. Not because I wanted the Blackwell name. Not because I had ever imagined myself belonging to their world. But because I suddenly realized how they saw me. Not as a person. Not as someone who spent hours caring for Ethan's grandmother when no one else had time. Not as someone working 3 jobs to support herself and help her younger brother through college. Just a maid. Just another uniform passing through their hallways. I swallowed carefully and stepped back before anyone could discover me standing there. My chest felt tight. The hallway suddenly seemed colder than before. I pushed the cart forward and kept walking. One foot after the other. Quiet. Invisible. Professional. Yet the words followed me all the way upstairs. A girl like Grace Carter could never carry the Blackwell name. By the time I reached the gallery windows, twilight had settled over the estate. The sky outside glowed deep blue. Rain tapped softly against the glass. I stood there holding a dust cloth in my hand and looked out across the sprawling grounds. Then, for the first time in 2 years, I made a decision. At the end of the month, I would leave Blackwell Estate. They didn't know it yet. Neither did I. But that choice was about to change every life inside that mansion. I spent the next 3 days pretending nothing had changed. That turned out to be harder than I expected. Every time I walked through the mansion, every time I polished a table or folded fresh linens, I heard Margaret Blackwell's voice in the back of my mind. Some people simply are not built for that world. Maybe she was right. The truth was, I had never wanted their world. I did not care about private jets or charity galas or family names printed across skyscrapers. I cared about paying rent on time. I cared about helping my younger brother finish college without drowning in student loans. I cared about making it through another week. But knowing someone looked at you and saw less than a person had a way of lingering. Thursday arrived with steady rain tapping against the mansion windows. The estate felt quieter than usual. Most of the family had traveled into Manhattan for meetings, leaving only a handful of staff members and Eleanor Blackwell in residence. Eleanor was the reason I had stayed at Blackwell Estate as long as I had. At 82 years old, she carried herself with more grace than people half her age. While others saw a billionaire matriarch, I saw the woman who secretly kept peppermint candies in her nightstand and watched old black and white movies when she could not sleep. She treated me like a human being. In a place where that was surprisingly rare, it mattered. I knocked lightly on her sitting room door before entering. The scent of chamomile tea drifted through the room. Eleanor sat near the fireplace wrapped in a pale blue cardigan, a hardcover book resting in her lap. Her silver hair caught the soft afternoon light. She smiled the moment she saw me. "There you are," she said. "I was beginning to think you had abandoned me." I laughed despite myself. I was gone for 15 minutes. A very long 15 minutes. Her eyes narrowed playfully. "Now tell me what is wrong." My smile faded. Eleanor had a gift for noticing things. "Nothing is wrong. Grace. Just one word. Gentle. Patient. Somehow impossible to argue with." I looked down at the tea tray in my hands. I had been thinking about making a change. A change? I nodded. Maybe finding another job. The room fell quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Eleanor closed her book. "And is this because you want something different?" I hesitated. "Partly." She studied me for several seconds. "Or is it because someone made you feel unwelcome?" I swallowed. Eleanor knew her family better than anyone. She did not need details. Her expression softened. People who spend their lives measuring worth by status usually end up very poor in the ways that matter. I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. Before I could answer, a sharp sound echoed from the hallway outside. Then another. Like something heavy hitting the floor. Eleanor frowned. "That does not sound good." I moved toward the door. Voices were rising outside. Concerned voices. Hurried footsteps. My pulse quickened. The mansion was usually calm. Organized. Predictable. Whatever was happening was not normal. I stepped into the hallway just as one of the housekeepers rounded the corner, her face pale with worry. "Grace," she said breathlessly. "It is Mr. Blackwell. He is here early. And something is very wrong." I followed the housekeeper down the staircase, my shoes barely making a sound against the polished wood. The energy inside the mansion had changed completely. Staff members stood clustered near the entrance hall, whispering in worried voices. When I reached the bottom step, I finally saw him. Ethan Blackwell stood near the front doors, rainwater darkening the shoulders of his charcoal overcoat. He looked nothing like the composed executive whose face appeared on magazine covers. His jaw was tight. His expression unreadable. Beside him stood two assistants holding folders and phones, both speaking rapidly as if trying to solve 10 problems at once. Then I noticed what everyone else was staring at. An elderly groundskeeper sat in a chair near the fireplace, breathing heavily. Mr. Harris. He had worked on the estate for more than 30 years. One hand pressed against his chest while a staff member offered him a glass of water. Relief washed through me. It was not an emergency. Not exactly. But something was clearly wrong. "The ambulance is on the way," someone said. Mr. Harris nodded weakly. Ethan crouched beside him without hesitation, his expensive coat brushing against the marble floor. "Do not worry about the gardens," he said calmly. "Right now, you focus on yourself." The older man looked embarrassed. "I am sorry, sir." I did not mean to cause trouble. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. You have spent 3 decades taking care of this property. You are not trouble. The room fell silent. I was not sure anyone expected that response. Least of all Mr. Harris. For a moment, I forgot every rumor I had ever heard about Ethan Blackwell. I forgot the headlines about billion-dollar negotiations and ruthless business deals. All I saw was a man speaking to an employee with genuine respect. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. After the paramedics left with Mr. Harris, the tension inside the mansion slowly faded. Staff members returned to work. Conversations resumed. I turned toward the hallway, intending to disappear before anyone noticed me standing there. Grace. My name stopped me cold. I turned. Ethan stood several feet away. Tall. Calm. Rain still glistening faintly on his coat. His eyes settled on me with surprising focus. My grandmother asked for you earlier. I was with her this afternoon. She mentioned that. His voice remained even. Professional. Yet something about the way he looked at me felt different. Like he was actually seeing me instead of looking through me. She also said you made her laugh for the first time this week. I blinked. That is mostly her doing. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It lasted less than a second. Maybe. Then one of his assistants approached holding a phone. Ethan's attention shifted immediately back to business. The moment was over. Thank you for taking care of her, he said before walking away. I stood there long after he disappeared into the West Wing. Because in 2 years, Ethan Blackwell had never once spoken more than 3 words to me. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, that brief conversation unsettled me more than Margaret Blackwell's cruel words ever had. I told myself it meant nothing. People spoke to each other every day. A simple conversation did not change anything. Yet the memory followed me through the rest of the week. The way Ethan had thanked me. The way he had looked directly at me instead of through me. It was unusual enough to feel important, even if I knew it should not. Friday morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds. The estate buzzed with activity as preparations for the upcoming charity gala intensified. Fresh flower arrangements appeared in every room. Delivery trucks arrived throughout the day. Staff members rushed between hallways carrying boxes, decorations, and guest lists. Meanwhile, I spent most of my shift helping Eleanor organize old photographs in her private sitting room. She seemed happier than usual. More energetic. Every few minutes she would hold up another picture and tell me a story about someone I had never met. By noon, sunlight briefly pushed through the clouds outside. I was carrying a stack of framed photographs toward a cabinet when Eleanor suddenly fell silent. I turned. The color had drained from her face. The frame slipped slightly in my hands. Eleanor? She blinked slowly. One hand pressed against the armrest of her chair. I think I stood up too quickly. But something about her voice worried me. I set the photographs down immediately and knelt beside her. Do not move. She tried to smile. You sound bossy. That is because I am concerned. Her hand felt colder than usual. Not alarming. Just different enough to catch my attention. I grabbed the glass of water from the side table and encouraged her to take a few small sips while I checked her breathing. Years of working at the nursing home had taught me to stay calm. Panic helped nobody. A few minutes later, one of the house staff entered the room. Should I call someone? She asked nervously. Call the family physician, I replied. And let Mr. Blackwell know. The next 20 minutes felt much longer. Eleanor remained alert, but I stayed beside her the entire time. When the physician finally arrived, he completed his examination and smiled reassuringly. Nothing serious, he said. A combination of fatigue and dehydration. You did exactly the right thing. Relief washed through me so quickly my knees felt weak. Eleanor squeezed my hand. See? I told you I was difficult to get rid of. The physician laughed. So did I. A few moments later, another voice entered the room. Grandmother. I turned. Ethan stood in the doorway. His expression softened the moment he saw Eleanor sitting comfortably in her chair. The physician explained what had happened. Ethan listened carefully without interrupting. Then his attention shifted toward me. You stayed with her the entire time? He asked. Of course. The answer came out before I thought about it. For several seconds, he said nothing. The room seemed strangely quiet. Then he nodded once. Thank you, Grace. Just 4 words. Simple words. Yet something changed in the way he said them. As though gratitude was not a formality. As though he actually meant it. Later that evening, while I was leaving the estate, I noticed a black sedan parked near the front entrance. Through the mansion windows, I caught sight of Margaret Blackwell speaking to Ethan. Neither looked happy. And for the first time, I had the strange feeling that whatever disagreement was unfolding inside that house somehow involved me. I should have ignored the feeling. Life had taught me that wealthy families had complicated conversations every day, and none of them had anything to do with people like me. Yet all weekend, I kept noticing small things. A conversation that stopped when I entered a room. A glance exchanged between 2 staff members. Margaret Blackwell seemed colder than usual whenever our paths crossed. Even Eleanor noticed it. Monday morning arrived bright and clear after days of rain. Sunlight spilled across the estate gardens, turning the trimmed hedges and stone pathways almost golden. I arrived at 7 o'clock carrying a paper cup of coffee and a notebook filled with calculations. My brother's next tuition payment was due in 3 weeks. I had spent half the night working through numbers. Rent. Utilities. Gas. Tuition. The math never seemed to get easier. By lunchtime, I was helping Eleanor organize letters in her private study when she suddenly asked, "Have you ever considered going back to school?" I laughed softly. Every day. Then why do not you? The question caught me off guard. I carefully stacked another group of envelopes. Because dreams are expensive. Eleanor watched me for a long moment. Sometimes they are less expensive than regret. Before I could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Ethan entered carrying a tablet and several folders. He looked as though he had already worked 12 hours despite it being barely afternoon. His tie was slightly loosened. The first sign of imperfection I had ever seen on him. Sorry to interrupt, he said. I need grandmother's signature. Eleanor immediately pointed toward me. Grace was just telling me about her plans. My eyes widened. I was not. Ethan looked between us. Plans? There are none, I said quickly. Eleanor ignored me completely. She wants to become a physical therapist. My face burned. I never said that. You mentioned it 6 months ago. Ethan's gaze settled on me. Not judgmental. Not dismissive. Just curious. Physical therapy? I shrugged. A long time ago. It is not important. It sounds important. The room felt suddenly smaller. I focused on the letters in my hands. Some things are not practical. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ethan signed one of his documents and said quietly, "Practical and worthwhile are not always the same thing." The comment stayed with me long after he left. Later that evening, I finished my shift and headed toward the employee parking lot. The sky had turned orange with sunset. My old sedan sat near the back fence exactly where I had left it. As I approached, I noticed something tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Confused, I pulled it free. It was an envelope. Plain white. No name written on it. Inside was a brochure from a respected physical therapy program in Manhattan. The exact program I had researched years earlier before giving up on the idea. My heartbeat slowed. Then quickened again. There was no note. No explanation. Just the brochure and a business card from the admissions office. I stared at them for several seconds before looking back toward the mansion glowing softly against the evening sky. Someone inside that house knew far more about me than I had ever realized. I carried the brochure around for 3 days before finally admitting that I could not stop thinking about it. It stayed inside my bag during every shift, folded carefully between my notebook and a stack of overdue bills. Every time I saw it, I felt the same mixture of hope and frustration. Hope because it reminded me of a future I had once wanted. Frustration because I knew how far away that future seemed. By Thursday, the estate had transformed completely. The charity gala was only 2 days away. Contractors moved through the grounds. Florists filled the hallways with white roses and orchids. Catering staff arrived carrying equipment worth more than my car. Everywhere I looked, people were preparing for a night that would probably raise millions of dollars. Meanwhile, I spent my lunch break sitting on a bench behind the greenhouse eating a sandwich and calculating expenses on my phone. Tuition alone would require more money than I had saved in 2 years. The numbers refused to cooperate. You look like someone trying to solve world hunger. I nearly dropped my phone. Eleanor sat beside me wrapped in a light cardigan despite the warm afternoon. I laughed. Only my budget. She smiled knowingly. That bad? Worse. For several minutes, we sat quietly watching gardeners trim the hedges. Then Eleanor spoke again. Do you know what Ethan was like as a child? I shook my head. Determined. Stubborn. Completely impossible. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. When he wanted something, he would not stop until he found a way. That sounds useful. It can be. She studied me carefully. And dangerous. Before I could ask what she meant, a black luxury car rolled into the circular driveway. Another followed behind it. Eleanor sighed softly. Here we go. The passenger door opened. A tall blonde woman stepped out wearing an elegant cream-colored dress and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Even from a distance, confidence radiated from her. Every movement seemed practiced. Perfect. Eleanor noticed my expression. Victoria Harrington. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Business magazines. Society columns. The daughter of another powerful family. She and Ethan have known each other for years, Eleanor said. Something about her tone suggested there was more to the story. Later that afternoon, I found out exactly what she meant. I was arranging fresh flowers in the main ballroom when Victoria entered with 2 event planners. Her gaze swept across the room before settling on me. Not hostile. Not friendly. Simply assessing. Like someone examining furniture. You. I looked up. Yes? She glanced toward the floral arrangement in my hands. Move those roses farther left. I adjusted them slightly. Like this? No. Her smile never reached her eyes. But I suppose it is close enough. The planners exchanged awkward glances. I returned my attention to the flowers. A few moments later, another voice entered the room. Ethan. Victoria's entire expression brightened instantly. She crossed the ballroom toward him. Familiar. Comfortable. Like someone who already belonged there. I looked away immediately and focused on my work. Yet before I could leave, I heard Victoria ask a question. Who is she? Silence followed. Then Ethan answered. Her name is Grace. Something about the way he said it made the room feel unexpectedly quiet. The rest of the afternoon felt strangely unbalanced. I told myself I was imagining things. Ethan had simply answered a question. Victoria had simply asked one. Yet something about the exchange lingered in my mind long after I returned to work. The gala was now less than 48 hours away, and the mansion seemed to operate on pure momentum. Every room sparkled. Every detail mattered. By evening, my feet ached from hours of moving furniture, polishing silver, and helping coordinate final preparations. I was carrying a box of place cards toward the library when I heard raised voices through the partially open door. Not angry. Tense. I immediately turned to leave. Then I heard my name. I froze. Grace? Victoria sounded amused. You know the maid's name? A brief silence followed. I know the names of people who work for me, Ethan replied. His tone was calm. Controlled. Most executives do not. Then most executives should do better. I should have walked away. Instead, I stood there staring at the box in my hands while my heartbeat gradually sped up. Victoria laughed softly. You have changed. Have I? You notice things now that you never used to notice. The conversation ended moments later when footsteps approached. I quickly moved down the hallway before anyone could see me standing there. But the words stayed with me. You notice things now that you never used to notice. The following morning, I arrived early for my shift. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and expensive flowers. Staff members hurried across the grounds carrying final deliveries. Everything had to be perfect. Around 10 o'clock, Eleanor asked me to accompany her to the garden terrace. The weather was beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the hedges. For almost an hour, we sat together drinking tea and watching workers prepare the outdoor reception area. It was peaceful. Then Eleanor asked a question that caught me completely off guard. When were you planning to tell me? I looked up. Tell you what? That you intend to leave. My stomach dropped. Who told you? Nobody. She smiled gently. I know you. I looked away toward the fountain. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I sighed. At the end of the month. Eleanor nodded slowly as though she had expected the answer. And are you leaving because you found something better? No. Then why? The honest answer sat painfully in my chest. Because I was tired of feeling invisible. Because I was tired of being reminded where I belonged. Because dreams seemed impossible here. But I could not say any of that. It is just time, I whispered. Eleanor studied me carefully. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Sometimes people leave because they are running away. Sometimes they leave because they are finally ready to move forward. Make sure you know which one this is. That evening, as I finished my shift, I discovered another envelope waiting beside my locker. My name was written neatly across the front. Inside was a scholarship application. Not a brochure. Not information. An actual application. Attached was a note containing only 6 words. You should not give up yet. I stared at the handwriting for a very long time. Because for the first time I was almost certain I knew exactly who had sent it. The gala arrived wrapped in gold light and impossible expectations. By 6 o'clock, luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Guests stepped onto the red carpet wearing designer gowns and tailored suits that probably cost more than I earned in a year. Inside the mansion, every chandelier glowed. Every crystal glass sparkled. Every conversation seemed to carry the quiet confidence of people who had never worried about choosing between groceries and rent. Meanwhile, I adjusted my uniform and focused on work. It was easier that way. Simpler. The scholarship application remained hidden inside my locker. I had not filled it out. Not yet. Part of me still believed it had been sent by mistake. Another part knew better. Around 8 o'clock, the ballroom was full. Laughter echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings. A string quartet played near the grand staircase. I moved through the crowd carrying trays and helping coordinate service. Most guests barely noticed me. That was normal. What was not normal was how often I caught Ethan looking in my direction. Not constantly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it. The third time it happened, I nearly walked into a floral arrangement. Careful. The familiar voice came from beside me. I turned and found Ethan standing only a few feet away. My pulse immediately betrayed me. I am fine, I said. His gaze dropped briefly to the tray in my hands. You look exhausted. I laughed softly. That is because I am exhausted. To my surprise, he smiled. A real smile this time. Small. Genuine. Somehow far more disarming than the polished expressions he wore in public interviews. You should take a break. I do not think the event coordinator would agree. Then it is fortunate I own the house. Before I could respond, another guest approached him. The moment ended as quickly as it had begun. Yet the warmth of that brief exchange followed me through the next hour. Near 9:30, I finally slipped outside for a few minutes of fresh air. The terrace overlooked the illuminated gardens. Music drifted faintly through the open doors behind me. Cool evening air brushed against my face. For the first time all night, I relaxed. Hiding? I nearly jumped. Ethan stood near the stone railing holding a glass of sparkling water. Breathing, I corrected. That too. Silence settled between us. Comfortable silence. Unexpected silence. The kind that did not require filling. After a moment, his attention shifted toward the gardens. Did you submit the application? My breath caught. There it was. Confirmation. I looked at him carefully. You sent it. He did not deny it. Did you submit it? No. His jaw tightened slightly. Why? I stared out at the fountain below. Because people like me do not usually get opportunities like that. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he turned toward me completely. Grace. My name sounded different in his voice. Steadier. More personal. The reason opportunities exist is because someone decides to take them. I looked up. Our eyes met. And for the first time since I had arrived at Blackwell Estate, I felt something shift. Not in him. In me. Like a door I had kept closed for years had finally opened a few inches. For the next few days, I could not stop thinking about that conversation on the terrace. Not because Ethan Blackwell had encouraged me. Not because he had sent the application. But because, for the first time in years, someone had looked at my dream and treated it like it mattered. That should have felt wonderful. Instead, it felt dangerous. Hope always came with a price. Monday morning arrived with cold wind sweeping across the estate grounds. The gala was over. The flowers were being removed. The tents were coming down. Everything was returning to normal. Or at least it should have been. By noon, I began noticing strange looks from staff members. Conversation stopped when I entered a room. Two housekeepers whispered near the laundry room and immediately changed the subject when they saw me. Even Eleanor seemed distracted during lunch. Something was wrong. I just did not know what. The answer arrived that afternoon. I was organizing linens in the East Wing storage room when one of the younger employees hurried inside holding her phone. Her expression was somewhere between nervous and embarrassed. Grace, she said carefully. Have you seen this? My stomach tightened instantly. She handed me the phone. A society blog filled the screen. At the top was a photograph from the gala. Ethan stood near the terrace entrance. I was visible in the background carrying a serving tray. The headline made my face go cold. Billionaire heir distracted by household employee? Sources question growing attachment. I stared at the screen. Then at the article beneath it. Every sentence felt worse than the one before. Anonymous sources claimed a staff member was using charm and proximity to attract Ethan's attention. Anonymous sources suggested favoritism. Anonymous sources hinted that career opportunities and gifts were being exchanged. None of it was true. Not a single word. Yet reading it still felt like being trapped inside someone else's lie. I handed the phone back slowly. Who wrote this? She shook her head. Nobody knows. But I had a feeling. A very uncomfortable feeling. By evening, the article had spread further. Not everywhere. Not enough to become major news. Just enough to create gossip. Just enough to damage a reputation. My reputation. I finished my shift in silence and headed toward the employee parking lot. The air felt colder than usual. The sky threatened rain. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Grace. I turned. Ethan stood several feet away. His expression immediately told me he had already seen the article. I am sorry, he said. The words surprised me. You did not write it. No. His jaw tightened. But I know exactly where it came from. I looked away. Embarrassment burned beneath my skin. It does not matter. It does. The certainty in his voice made me look back. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he added quietly, people should not have to defend themselves for being decent human beings. The wind stirred through the trees around us. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the horizon. And for the first time, I realized this situation was becoming much bigger than gossip. Because whoever had started those rumors was not trying to hurt Ethan. They were trying to make sure someone like me remembered exactly where I belonged. The rain arrived sometime after midnight. By morning, the estate grounds were covered in a silver haze that blurred the gardens beyond the windows. Normally I loved rainy days. They made the mansion feel quieter. Smaller somehow. But nothing felt quiet anymore. The article had done exactly what it was designed to do. Not enough damage to create a scandal. Just enough damage to create doubt. Every conversation seemed slightly different. Every glance lingered a little longer than before. By Tuesday afternoon, I had made my decision. I would leave sooner than planned. The realization settled over me while I was folding fresh linens in the East Wing. Simple. Certain. Painful. I cared too much about Eleanor to become another source of conflict inside her family. And I cared too much about myself to spend months defending rumors I had never earned. That evening, I sat alone in the employee lounge staring at my resignation letter. 1 page. Less than 200 words. Somehow it felt heavier than anything I had ever written. My fingers traced the edge of the paper. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope. The next morning, I carried it with me throughout my shift. Every hour I told myself I would deliver it. Every hour I found another reason to wait. Around 3 o'clock, Eleanor asked me to join her in the sunroom. The storm had passed. Warm sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors. She was working on a crossword puzzle when I arrived. You have that look again, she said immediately. I laughed softly. What look? The one people get before they make a mistake. My smile faded. She noticed everything. I sat across from her and stared at the envelope resting in my lap. Maybe leaving is not a mistake. Eleanor's pencil stopped moving. Slowly, she looked up. You already decided. It was not a question. I nodded. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Somewhere outside, birds sang in the garden. Finally, Eleanor sighed. Running away rarely solves the real problem. Maybe. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. But staying is not helping either. Before she could respond, the sunroom door opened. Ethan stepped inside carrying a folder. His expression shifted the moment he noticed me. Then his eyes dropped to the envelope in my hands. Something changed in his face. Not dramatically. Just enough. What is that? He asked. I looked down. Suddenly the paper felt impossible to hold. Eleanor answered before I could. A resignation letter. Silence filled the room. Heavy silence. The kind that makes every sound seem louder. Ethan stared at me for several seconds. Then at the envelope. Then back at me. You are leaving? I forced myself to nod. His jaw tightened slightly. The reaction surprised me. More than that, it unsettled me. Because for the first time since I had met him, Ethan Blackwell looked less like a billionaire accustomed to getting answers and more like a man who had just heard something he never expected to hear. The silence seemed to stretch forever. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The rustle of leaves outside the sunroom windows. Even the soft clink of Eleanor setting down her teacup. Ethan did not look away. Neither did I. Why? He finally asked. The question sounded simple. It was not. There were 100 answers. Because I was tired. Because the rumors hurt. Because every day felt like a reminder that I did not belong here. Because staying had started to matter more than it should. I lowered my eyes to the envelope in my hands. I think it is time. That is not an answer. His voice remained calm, but something underneath it had changed. Eleanor quietly stood from her chair. I suddenly remember an appointment. She moved toward the door with suspicious timing. Neither of us stopped her. The moment the door closed behind her, the room felt even smaller. I let out a slow breath. What would you like me to say? Ethan took a step closer. The truth. The truth. Such a simple request. Such a difficult thing to give. The truth is that people are talking. My fingers tightened around the envelope. The truth is that every time someone writes another story or starts another rumor, it becomes harder to do my job. His expression darkened. Not with anger toward me. With frustration. You should not be punished because other people have poor judgment. I laughed softly. There was no humor in it. That is not how the world works. For a moment, he looked almost disappointed. Then he nodded once. No. It is not. The honesty surprised me. Most powerful people spent their lives pretending they could control everything. Ethan seemed painfully aware that he could not. I looked toward the gardens outside. Sunlight shimmered across the fountain. Everything appeared peaceful from a distance. You asked me once why I never applied to that program, I said quietly. The answer is because I spent years being practical. I learned not to expect too much. He remained silent. Listening. Really listening. People like me do not get many chances. People like you, he repeated. I immediately regretted the phrase. Yet before I could explain, he shook his head. Grace, do you know what I see when I look at you? My heartbeat stumbled. I said nothing. I see someone who works harder than anyone else in this house. I see someone my grandmother trusts completely. I see someone who spent years putting everyone else's future ahead of her own. His voice remained steady. And somehow you still think that makes you ordinary. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. I looked away before he could see it. The room fell quiet again. Then Ethan reached into the folder he had been carrying and placed a document on the table between us. I stared at it. Scholarship approval. Full tuition coverage. The exact program from the application. My breath caught. Slowly, I looked up. What is this? Ethan's eyes met mine. Your future, he said. If you are willing to stop running from it. For several seconds, I could not breathe. The scholarship approval sat on the table between us like something unreal. My eyes moved across the page again and again, searching for a mistake. There was none. Full tuition. Academic support. Clinical placement opportunities. Everything I had convinced myself was impossible. My hands trembled slightly as I lowered the document. I do not understand, I whispered. Ethan remained standing across from me. You submitted the application 3 nights ago. I stared at him. How do you know that? A faint smile touched his face. Because I was hoping you would. Heat rushed into my cheeks. I remembered the application sitting on my kitchen table. The long hours spent filling it out after work. The moment I finally pressed submit and immediately regretted it because hope felt far more frightening than disappointment. "You arranged this?" I asked. "No." His answer came immediately. "The scholarship committee made their decision. I only made sure they saw your application." That mattered more than I expected. He had opened a door. He had not carried me through it. The realization settled somewhere deep inside me. For years I had assumed people like Ethan lived in a different universe. One where money solved every problem and opportunity appeared automatically. Yet standing there, I suddenly saw something else. Someone who believed effort deserved a chance. Someone who had been quietly paying attention while I was busy convincing myself I was invisible. I looked down at the resignation letter still resting in my lap. It seemed absurd now. Small. Temporary. A solution created by fear rather than conviction. Ethan noticed where my attention had gone. "Are you still planning to leave?" The question lingered between us. I thought about the rumors. The gossip. The uncomfortable stares. Then I thought about Eleanor. About my brother. About the version of myself who had once dreamed of helping people recover and rebuild their lives. The version I had abandoned because reality felt too expensive. Slowly, I tore the resignation letter in half. Then again. And again. The pieces slipped into the wastebasket beside the chair. Ethan watched silently. Relief flickered across his face before disappearing almost immediately. "Good," he said quietly. I laughed. That sounded very confident. It was. The honesty made me smile despite myself. For the first time in weeks, the weight pressing against my chest began to ease. Outside the windows, afternoon sunlight spilled across the gardens. Everything looked brighter than before. Or maybe I was finally seeing it differently. A knock sounded at the door. Before either of us could respond, it opened. Margaret Blackwell entered. She stopped instantly when she saw us together. Her eyes moved from Ethan to the scholarship document on the table. Then to me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked. Ethan's expression became unreadable. "No." Margaret folded her arms. "Good. Because there is a family dinner tomorrow evening, and there are several matters that need to be discussed." Her gaze lingered on me for a fraction of a second too long. Several very important matters. Something in her voice sent a warning through me. And as she turned and walked away, I had the sudden feeling that the real storm had not passed at all. It was only beginning. The family dinner felt less like a meal and more like a board meeting disguised by fine china and candlelight. I was not supposed to be there. Not at the table. Not in the conversation. My job was simply to help serve dinner and disappear into the background. Yet from the moment guests began arriving, I could feel tension hanging in the air. Margaret Blackwell sat at the head of the table with perfect posture and a carefully controlled expression. Victoria Harrington arrived 20 minutes later wearing a confident smile that never quite reached her eyes. Ethan remained calm throughout the evening, but I had learned enough by then to recognize the signs. The quieter he became, the more carefully he was choosing his next move. Dinner progressed through several courses. Business topics. Charity projects. Family investments. Then Margaret finally placed her fork down and looked directly at Ethan. There is no reason to delay the announcement any longer. The room fell silent. Victoria smiled. Ethan did not. "What announcement?" he asked evenly. Margaret seemed surprised by the question. "Your engagement, of course." My breath caught. Around the table, several relatives exchanged approving looks. Victoria sat a little straighter. Everything suddenly made sense. The rumors. The pressure. The constant scrutiny. This had never been about me. It had been about a future someone else had already planned for him. I lowered my eyes and focused on my work. A few minutes later, I carried an empty tray toward the doorway. Then Ethan spoke. "There will not be an engagement." The silence that followed felt enormous. Margaret stared at him. Victoria blinked. Nobody moved. Ethan's voice remained calm. "I respect Victoria. But I will not marry someone because it is convenient." The room erupted into overlapping questions. I should have left. Instead, I stood frozen near the doorway. Margaret's expression hardened. "Then what exactly are you choosing?" Ethan slowly stood from his chair. His gaze moved across the room before settling on me. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. "I am choosing a life based on respect," he said. "Not status." Nobody spoke. "I am choosing someone who never asked for anything. Someone who spent years helping others while expecting nothing in return. Someone who reminds me every day that character matters more than family names." Every eye in the room turned toward me. Heat rushed into my face. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Then Eleanor smiled. A warm, knowing smile. She reached toward her hand and removed a ring that had belonged to generations of Blackwell women. Slowly, she held it out toward me. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Margaret looked stunned. Victoria looked defeated. But Eleanor only squeezed my hand. "Worth is not inherited," she said softly. "It is earned." Months later, as I walked across the stage to begin the next chapter of my education, that lesson remained with me. People had spent years telling me where I belonged. They measured value through wealth, status, and appearances. They were wrong. Because the most important thing I learned was this. The right people do not see your position. They see your character. And once someone truly sees that, everything changes.